All right, we are live. Welcome to Happy Dance's Guide to the Revolution. Good to see you,
Thank
friend.
you. Thanks, man. It's actually really nice to be here.
it.
It's
Yeah, I should get one of those headsets. Looks pretty
yeah.
good. You use that for like gaming and stuff too, or is that just like?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, but I mean, the gaming headsets, they just have good sound quality, good mics.
Right.
So they're kind of good all around.
Trash to noobs on the internet.
Yeah. Or like listening to trash talk is the
right.
more accurate reality. Like
yeah. I never got into that whole scene, but it seems like a wild ride there. Lots of people.
It's the worst. Like it's really fun and like you can meet a lot of really cool people, but 99% of the time you're just gonna meet the bottom of the barrel as far as humanity goes. So like it's in-game like toggle mute. That's probably the best feature that's ever been added to online games.
Yeah. So let's get into this. One of the things I like to start with is like where we met. You went to North Pocono, right? Were you a year older than me or 2 years older than me? Or
yeah, I graduated 2006. I think you were, because I actually went to I graduated with your brother Shane.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
R.I.P. to that dude, man.
Yeah, I
miss him every day.
He was a good guy. Like, there aren't a lot of people that I would look back fondly on from North Pocono. Like, there's a lot of pretty bad people there, but like Shane was always just like, he was, the light at the center of every room. He was just a really cool dude,
It's good to hear you say that, man. It makes me happy, And it was so long ago, like I've dealt with it, I can talk about it, but it's still hard sometimes, and it's hard on my parents mostly, my heart breaks for them. And I kind of live in like constant fear that I'm going to die in a car accident and like leave them with that.
Yeah. Trauma, like it hits you hard, it does things that you don't expect. It makes you, it rewires your brain, like when you go through it. So it's, it's something you just have to deal with and overcome.
Right.
Like, it's.
Yeah. And obviously that was a tragedy. But I think it made me stronger, Yeah.
No, go ahead.
I lived with this realization that like it could be gone like that. Like somebody you love could be gone like tomorrow. We could be gone tomorrow, and it's like better love each other now while we have the chance.
Yeah. So like it makes you just want to be better to other people. It's like the people that are close to you, especially like you want to try to savor that time that you do get, because it's like it's not guaranteed.
Yeah. Family's tough too, and I had a really tough day with some family things, and I'm engaged now, so there's some new family dynamics, and it's challenging, and you don't get any redos, and you can't replace them either, It's like with a friend, it's like, hey, well, you're kind of an asshole, I'm kind of over it, then you can just kind of move on. But if you're having beef with a family member, it's like you got to figure out a way to resolve it, because it's like they're still gonna, they're always gonna be there, as long as they're there, they're gonna be there,
Yeah, I mean, I kind of come from the same place. Like I had I had a good relationship with my dad. He died actually the day that Trump got elected, which was nice. That was a nice little like
getting kicked while you're down, huh?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't like that was the worst thing that happened to me that day. Like I'm not gonna be over dramatic about somebody like Trump. Like it was definitely that was harder, And, but at the same time, it almost made me like, it shielded me from that political side where like I wasn't so annoyed and like angry all the time.
Yeah.
Because I was processing grief, So it was, again, like you just learn how to process them, and it does make you stronger. Like at the end,
it does. Yeah. So, and so you were a couple years older than me in North Pocono, and I don't remember you specifically from them, but I do remember your presence online and seeing you're always saying things online. You're very active on Facebook, and that's one of the reasons why I reached out to you, is because like I wanted to bring people in here to talk about things who are clearly opinionated and clearly have thoughts about these things and are passionate about these things, and like you obviously fit the bill. Whether we're 100% aligned, that's a whole other question altogether. I think sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't, but I'm hoping to kind of move all that forward and get to a place where we can find some common ground. So So talk about a little bit of the things that you've been posting about. I mean, there's not really sure exactly where to start. I have a list here of things we can kind of jump to, but like,
I mean, typically,
go ahead.
Honestly, it's just like whenever something pops up and it's either a major news item or it's it kind of gets buried in the shuffle of other distractions. And like it's usually just something that annoys me. Like that seems to be like kind of the driving force, is where it's like you see bad logic, you see a lot of intellectual dishonesty, and like kind of historical revisionism. Like there's a lot of kind of layers to things that I think a lot of people just overlook. Like because they expect, when you read the news, you don't expect to have to like analyze it. That's and I think that's kind of a consequence of like a generational thing too, because back when you had Walter Cronkite, reading the news out every night, there wasn't really opinion injected into that. He was just listing facts. And it's like, it's really hard to train, an entire generation or more, of people who are expecting to just have news read to them, and that they believe that it's the truth because it's the newscaster's job to discern what that is. But it's not that way anymore. 24-hour news has destroyed the idea that you can only list facts out. Like everything has to be couched in opinion and analysis. You have, like news anchors are pundits now. They're not really fact deliverers. They're just kind of opinion wheelhouses, and that's really, it's damaging, because there's no reliable source of accurate information.
Right.
And that's what causes me to post the most. It's just trying to sort through the bullshit, for people who are listening, and
Yeah, I want to come back to the thing where you said annoyed, because I think that's a good word, and I want to kind of build on that. But before I do that, I want to kind of, before I met with Jim Levert and did that podcast, I'm not sure how far you got into that. We can talk about that later. But he kind of gave me a little homework assignment to put a list together of things Trump's done that I've liked and things Trump's done that I haven't liked. And through that process, it was so apparent, like whatever website I was on, it was like, well, clearly this is biased just by the way that things are worded. Like this is obviously skewed, just by the language used. And it's like, okay, where are like the facts? Like it's hard to.
Framing is so important. Like, and it's something that's just totally ignored. When like, just to bring up an example, using Trump, like his polls that he sends out, like, have you ever read those? Like the wording of it's insane. Like how much of a presupposition he's establishing for the person who's taking it. Right. And like it's making you like, well, if I pick the radical socialist Democrat agenda, like, am I a bad person? Like it's like, that's just crazy. But like, people respond to that. Like they love a simple, binary, basically. Right. And it's so much more complicated than that.
So back to the thing where you said annoyed, and I think just to kind of dig in that deeper, I think where that comes from is I think you're a smart person, and you see people who, well, relatively anyway, you're not the smartest, but you're definitely not the dumbest, But
I would say above average at best.
I see you as a smart person just by the way that the things that you're saying and the way you're wording them and things, And it's easy as a smart person to be annoyed because it's like, why isn't everybody as smart as me? It's so annoying. Like if everyone was like me, and it's like,
there is a lot of arrogance that comes with it. Like
it's hard to like have a conversation with somebody who's like not at your level or like entrenched into what they're into. I could see the frustration and annoyance, and I feel it too sometimes. And that's one of the reasons I'm doing this too, because being annoyed, living in a state of being annoyed isn't useful, right? It's like,
no.
And I'm not going to drop any names here, but like when we talked to you about like you were arguing with that one person, and I was like, he's like not that smart, right?
Yeah, and that's the problem, is like you get stuck in that though, where like you're just like, if I just say the right thing, like it's gonna click, and then like they'll maybe go down a rabbit hole, and like it's almost like a fool's optimism in a way, I guess. Like it even if it's coming from a very negative place, like it can be.
And that was one of the motivations for me to start this podcast too. Is like I got tired of that, like. I'm going to write this well-worded 16-paragraph thing, and I'm going to send this, and it's going to obviously prove me right. And then they're just going to, like, give you the flip the bird emoji or whatever.
TLDR, basically. They're like, I'm not reading that. Like, go somewhere else.
Well, I'm glad I proofread that 17 times.
Yeah. You're submitting it for your term paper. And, And
so that's where I'm at. I'd rather these long-form conversations are, like, more nuanced, write-ups, even if nobody reads them, like even if nobody watches this, I feel better getting into the nuances of issues rather than, name calling and back and forth and blah, blah, blah. Maybe, I'll still get sucked into that again at some point, but I'm really trying to, avoid that temptation.
Sometimes, as far as like I go for that, it's just like sometimes you just realize when you're not going to reach someone, and like especially it's easier when it's a stranger to fall into that. That's why the internet's kind of like the best and worst thing that's ever happened for humankind. Anonymity has been really great. Well, it's been really great for like the sense of obviously just access to everything, but the anonymity that comes along with that and like the lack of consequences. It just makes it really easy to abuse people. And like, I am very guilty of that. Of like, when I'm in an argument with somebody and it's just, I'm just losing all my patience. And I just, you just go at them because it's, they're an outlet for that frustration. And like, it's really difficult to keep that in check. And,
And if they were part of your community, like we live in such strange times now where it's like this global community and there's so many people, it's hard to keep track of them. But if they were like in your community, you'd probably be more careful because you'd want to express yourself in a way that like they understood.
Healthy.
That's healthy because you're still going to need them maybe, like, I think of like the wolf pack and like when the dominant wolf and the subordinate wolf, like he doesn't kill the subordinate wolf. He lets him live because he knows that they hunt in a pack and they're going to need him, even though might be the alpha, whatever, you got to find a way to move forward. But, okay, so before we get into any other specific topics, what are your thoughts on the Declaration of Interdependence? Kind of what I'm aiming for, any of the ideas I've expressed in the various podcasts so far. Like, how do you feel about it? Criticisms, thumbs ups. How do you feel?
I mean, I don't know. It's always hard to know where to start with something like that. The idea is solid, but I mean, it's a problem of getting people to understand and actually access it, and read it, to actually get a picture of kind of the idea that regular people could just write the plan for a new future, to at least like establish a new kind of core set of human rights. Because we're really stuck carrying a lot of dead people's baggage right now, and it's So I'm not sure, man. It's
definitely
a tough one.
Right?
Yeah,
like what I'm talking about not easy, but what I'm trying to get people to do is imagine if they could do something. If we could do it differently, what would it look like? Like, obviously we're fed up with this, that, and the other, but like, what would we replace it with?
Yeah, I mean, that is the question.
Right.
Like I think that really, in order for humankind, just as a species to survive, like there needs to be a reconciliation between pure capitalism and socialism. Like every the historical eras where the working classes and middle classes thrived the most was a healthy coupling of both. The American Golden Age was a result of the idea that socialism and capitalism aren't antagonists. Like it's a symbiotic relationship between the two. Capitalism dictates the drive to pursue innovation. It's creation basically. It's everything that gets created. But then the socialism aspect is okay. Well, every single person in that capitalist machine is a part that needs to be maintained. Like at an adequate level, otherwise the machine's going to fall apart. And I feel like starting at some point where we have to make people understand that these two systems are not at each other's throats. They're it's an inflated conflict by a ruling class that is determined to just get everything for themselves, at the cost of everybody else, because it's just all short-term thinking, from the people who are in control right now. And there's no consideration for long-term consequences, with, the exploding housing market, with, depressed wages for 40 years. The people, and this is a big Trump supporter line, of referencing unemployment. It's, the lowest it's been in, X number of years. It's 3.5% right now, which is really low. But what are those jobs? You know, they're part-time for no benefits.
And at what cost, you know?
Right. You know, and you know, you have 50% of people who earn wages. Like, this isn't even counting people who don't work, which is another, you know, boogeyman that people like to bring up. I'm talking 50% of people who work for a living, you know, can't afford, like, you know, their basic necessities. They're living below the poverty line. You know, they're paycheck to paycheck, you know, and the smallest unplanned expense could bankrupt them at any moment.
Yeah.
You know, it's like that narrow focus on short term and short, you know, just getting to the next thing. It's you know, manufactured by, you know, the people in, you know, the ruling class. Like, I'm going to use that a lot because this is a class conflict. You know, it's currently not violent, you know, but it's it could head there at any moment, you know.
It's like boiling, you know. You could almost see the bubbles forming, ready to bubble up on over.
Mm-hmm.
And they do little things, like they'll give you a little bit, they'll throw a little salt in there to raise the boiling temperature or whatever, you know. That's like calculated, you know. Keep it, you know. Here's some football. Here's a new movie. Here's a, you know.
Yeah, they're trying to turn the burner down just to keep it at like a low rolling boil, just something that's manageable, you know,
just
as long as it's not going over the pot.
You know, as long as you can keep extracting all the value, that's what they want. They want to keep the machine rolling.
Exactly, you know, but at the bare minimum of change that is required to keep that moving. Whereas you could implement sweeping changes, you know, with a bold government that is, you know, that has a focused plan, and you know, you could totally you could make this machine, you know, the most efficient thing that has ever run.
Yeah.
But, you know, the problem is to do that is that a lot of that money that's currently going to the executive and the ruling classes, like, that needs to go to the working class. There needs to be a reshift somewhere, you know, because the workers produce everything. The workers keep the machine running. Without the worker, there is no machine, you know, that is, and and you know, that's really the crux of it, is that it needs to be, you know, laid out as a class conflict between people who are silently waging war on us, you know, just by negligence and, you know, like a lot of contempt also. Like, there's but there's contempt on both sides. And, but I would say that, you know, towards the ruling class is more earned than the opposite.
Yeah. And you bring up the concept of like socialism versus capitalism, and you point out that they're not necessarily at odds. In fact, they need to somehow come in harmony with each other. And I think of different words for the same thing, like production and distribution, right? And if you look in human history, it's sort of men were sort of responsible for production to some extent, and women were responsible for distribution, you know? So I think that has a lot to do with the push towards more socialist policies, is the fact that women are now getting involved in these things, and they do care more about like the less fortunate just by like their very nature, you know. I think that's a good thing, and figuring out a way to balance all that out. I mean, there's certainly enough resources for everyone, right? But how do we structure the game so people don't pile up at the bottom while people at the top have more than numbers that are unfathomable?
Yeah. Billions and trillions at this point.
Something I talked about with Jim Levert in the previous podcast is it's not useful to have like hatred towards the successful either, you know, because I don't know about you, but I would love to be successful one day enough where like I could afford nice things, and, you know, I'm not there yet, but I would certainly like to get there, you know. So hating that person that's maybe future me puts me in a really strange position, you know.
Yeah, and but I think that there needs to be another distinction, like, between successful and a hoarder. You know, it's like there's a point where that desire to attain more and more and more is you know, a leech on society. You know, people like to talk about, you know, welfare being a big leech on society, but I mean, you know, Jeff Bezos makes $24,000 like I think it's an hour right now. It might be a minute, but, you know, I'm not 100% sure on that.
Sure. It's more than people make.
It's at least an hour. You know, like that's like the highest point that it is, which is just, you know, what purpose does that serve to the you know, us moving forward as a species, because there has to be some consideration of humanity as a whole, not just like the self, which is really where people get bogged down. And I would honestly like almost make the argument that it's the last vestiges of these evolutionary traits of just excessive greed and the need to attain things because of this fear of it all being taken away at any moment. And it's you have to a whole generation of people either need to be understood how to be rewired and educated on the realities of the modern world and like the levels of excess that we're currently allowing, whereas we could even it out a little bit.
So I was thinking about the Bezos thing since I saw you posted about him a few times, and where I sit right now is it feels like people underestimate the power that they have, because lots of people have Amazon Prime, lots of people order stuff at Amazon, lots of people go to Whole Foods. And if we decided that we weren't going to do those things until XYZ happened, if we came up with a list of demands and we said, listen, Mr. Bezos, I don't got anything against you personally, but we don't like the way you're doing business. And until you change these XYZ things, we're not going to participate in your business. If we really did that, I mean, they would have to adjust, right? I mean, they're too big to allow that to go on if people really participated,
Yeah.
But instead we don't do that, at least I don't,
No, I mean, I buy stuff from Amazon, constantly. But that's, the real issue there though is even if you try to enact a boycott on Amazon, a large scale, millions and millions of people, if you can get 50% of their Prime, customers and, another 50% of the regular customers to stop entirely, that's massively financially crippling to them.
Right.
But, the hostage situation that it is though, is that effect is going to be felt by workers first. It's going to result in massive layoffs. It's going to result in consolidation of assets. And warehouses and distribution centers and that's what's going to start checking off first in order to keep their profit afloat. And that's so it's basically it's pointing a gun at them, but that gun is also pointing at the family behind them, which is the real difficult part of it is that people alone I don't think as consumers we have as much power as we think. I think we have the power to enact minor changes in policy here and there based off of things like boycotts, but I think as a whole we're so caught up in just trying to survive that we can't make the meaningful changes that would actually be needed. And even if we did, it's just going to resonate. That they have, Amazon essentially holds up however many employees they have. It's probably in the millions by this point. And they can essentially hold them up as a shield, as we try to attack them in any meaningful way financially. And, so in solving the problem, you're going to be creating resentment because people are going to look at, that damn, Amazon boycott made me lose my job. And, if you get 300,000 people to do that, well, that's a significant number of people, to be angry at the people who are trying to wrestle power back, from people who have it all right now. Because I don't think that we have meaningful power, as it stands right now, because there's no regulating apparatus for us to channel our power into. The U.S. government, during, again, I hate to cite the golden age so much, but there was so much that was done right there, where you had worker protections were on the climb, the establishment of the 40-hour work week, the minimum wage, all of these things drove this massive upsurge in growth and production and the GDP. And, it elevated millions of people out of poverty into, I don't want to say opulence, but comparatively it was opulence. It was this whole new standard of living that hadn't really existed except for the highest reaches of society before then. And that's but the problem is you can't just, you try to tell people that, but they don't care, because they've been conditioned to believe that socialism's bad, socialism's the enemy. The Nazis were socialists, they're the Nazis and the communists, and like they're all just out to get your freedom, basically. And it's so much more complicated than that. And I think, that also just boils down into the annoyance, where it's like, sometimes it's really difficult to even feel like fighting for some of these people, which is like, it's a horrible thing to think about somebody who shares so much, of you, exactly, basically.
Like sometimes you just want to be like, why am I trying so hard to do any of this? I feel that. But I want to push back on one of the points you made about us having power. I mean, you as an individual maybe don't, but I do think collectively, like, yes, it would cause the Amazon employees some serious stress, and it would create some problems. But isn't that sort of how things work? Like, it has to get worse before it can get better. You have to go through, like, change is difficult and painful, and sacrifice is necessary.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely agree there. That's, it's not. I'm not saying that we shouldn't fight back because of that reality. It's just, I think it's also important to acknowledge it and try to make people understand it. There's going to be sacrifices. Like, it's going to come from all of us. There's no way we can continue our current way of life, like, in this ridiculously stratified system.
Yeah.
And persist as a species. Like, it's because it's going to collapse at some point. Again, because of that total disregard of the maintenance and the safety and the survival of the working class. And that's Marx had a lot of really terrible, like, kind of theories. He wasn't always the smartest person, but in outlining the realities of a class conflict between a ruling class and a working class, he had so much insight that is still valuable today, in just making people understand that, you might not feel like you're under attack, but you are. They don't care about you in the slightest. You are a number on a spreadsheet at this point. You can luck out and find really good employment. Like, I'm personally lucky enough to actually have a really good job that values and treats its employees really well. They're constantly paying out, extra bonuses based on productivity and, the growth of the company. And, like, there's really a sense of, the fact that they actually care about, you when you leave, that it's not just you're here for 8 to 5 and then you go home, we want to make sure that when you go home, you're also good, so that, and part of it is so that you can come back here and do good, but that's part of the symbiotic relationship that I'm talking about. It's, but that's an enormous amount of luck on my part.
Yeah, luck is the direction I wanted to take that next, because I do believe that you are a lucky person. I mean, even the fact that you were born in, I don't know if first world country is like what we're supposed to be saying anymore. It's kind of, I lose track of the appropriate terms,
first world country.
Or to be born in the present day compared to, I don't know, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, be born, I don't know your parents personally, but they seem to have done a good job, to be born with a reasonably high IQ, or at least the capacity to achieve a reasonably high IQ. Like, that's luck, but there's also a good bit of hard work there too. I mean, you probably got some sort of degree to get where you're at, and I'm sure that wasn't always easy, So, but you're right. It's like there's luck, but there's also hard work elements. And how do we balance that for the people who are unlucky, people who are born, with half, not half a brain, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they just don't have the mental capacity to, like, put or maybe they have physical limitations. Or, how do we account for those people? Like, it's hard. All the hard work in the world, is that going to even save them? Like, one of the examples that comes to mind is, like, IQ tests for the military. Like, if you don't have a certain IQ, you're not even allowed to be in the military, And it's like, they send those people to die, You're not even smart enough to go die for us,
Yeah.
And that's
definitely a significant, part of it, is that there's, there's this idea that if you work hard and you just put your nose to the grindstone, that you'll eventually succeed. But there's so much evidence to the contrary. To just say like, yeah, sometimes, and like really, that's good for anybody who does that. It's fulfilling. It makes you feel like you've accomplished something. That has value to you as a person. But the reality is not everybody can succeed. And that's capitalism is designed that way. It has to be. Without competition, there is no understanding what's best. What sells the most. What's the best product in terms of environmental impact. There's right. None of that.
Yeah, and I'm constantly conflicted with sort of the Darwinian aspect of it, that like we can't all succeed. I mean, not all animals live to reproduce. Not all people succeed in the same way. So we come from this, we evolved into what we are, right? But then we've created a society that, it's like, no, we don't want these people to fail because they're part of our society. And like, how do we balance all that? Like, it's almost like if we do too much of that, like the whole thing is going to fail, And it's hard. It's like, feels heartless to say, no, we have to let these people fail. We have to let them die. We have to, but I don't know. It's like,
yeah,
in the jungle, that's what happened, right? Like people who couldn't make it didn't make it.
Yeah.
And it seems like that's not necessarily the solution, but it also feels like it has to be part of it,
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's healthy to fail, but I don't think that failure should necessarily, mean death, I guess. That's like, right. Like you did say, that's how it works in the jungle, but I would argue like we're not in the jungle anymore. We have higher brain functions, that make us understand our environment, and we have this hyper abundance right now that could realistically take care of everybody on the earth, 10 times over.
Yeah.
But it requires, losing that reptilian brain, that one that's just about self-survival. Like I don't care about anybody else. Like it's just me. It's me against the world right now.
And like on a good day, I care about my family, and like after that, fuck them.
Yeah, and that's a really hard thing to break because it's biological. It's not just something that somebody learned. It's like it's the wiring in the house. You can't just take that out and put in So like it's, I don't know. I feel like that's going to be the conclusion of like a lot of like it's just so difficult to even understand like how do you move forward, like what is that balance of catching people when they fall, or like are people just going to rely on you catching them and then just fall repeatedly because they can, so like there's so many different layers of abuse that could take place in a society that is too giving and too nurturing, because that's also part of our nature is right. But again, I think that all just ties back to the self-preservation and like the desire to attain things for yourself. That's like kind of come along with the capitalist system where things mean status, and they mean how well you're doing, basically. Mm-hmm. They're like these physical objects you can hold up and be like, this is how good I am. And it's really hard to like, reprogram people to say like that shouldn't be the point like of all this. There's a better alternative, but it's going to require like a little bit of humility and empathy, which I think is another thing that also kind of lacks in droves.
And humility is like something, it's inward, where the empathy is outward, but I think there may be this two sides of the same coin,
It's compassion.
Right. Yep. And that's something I talked about with Jim Levert, is like having compassion as the highest virtue. I'm not sure that's the right move. It's not necessarily the highest virtue. There's all sorts of other competing virtues that are good too, like, hard work and truth and love and all that good stuff,
Yeah. But I just think, it needs to be in the equation. When we make a lot of these large sweeping decisions and, the policies that, our government creates, like they need to be rooted in that, not solely, there needs to be consideration for, the the capitalist side of that, because capitalism isn't by definition cruel. It's just, when it's, left with no counterbalance, is that the consequences of capitalism really start to pile up. But it's not like, it's literally just the idea of, I have this thing, do you want this? And then somebody can buy it off of you, and then you can trade. And like, it's just being able to, it's literally the biggest version of sharing that there is. It's just right. Like, there's a monetary aspect attached to it to create value, which is, right. But that's really what it is, because we could just as easily live in a world still where if you grew corn, you're the only guy who gets corn. Like, that's it, and if anybody else wants it, they can grow it themselves, but it's mine. Like, it's for right. my family, we could very still live, still be in that kind of mentality.
I, for one, am grateful that we don't live in that, because I don't even know how to grow corn.
No, like, I don't have the land corn. Or the soil to grow corn here. I'm sure of it.
Right. So a couple of different topics I want to get into here. So the first one, I have Elon Musk on here. I saw you put something there the other day. I think Ford or something came out with electric, blah, 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 and he gave him the old tip of the cap to them.
Yeah.
Is he, do you think he's a millionaire or a billionaire that's kind of doing it the right way, or how do you feel about him personally? Because full disclosure, he's probably one of the heroes of mine, at least from my background in energy and sustainability. I'm a huge fan. Like, that is not to say that I think he's perfect by any means, and obviously he has his flaws, probably in the similar way that like someone like Steve Jobs had his flaws,
Yeah.
But what do you think about him and his companies and the things he's doing?
Honestly, like, I really like him, especially after watching him on Joe Rogan. Like, the fact that he went on there to begin with. Yeah. And smoked weed with Joe Rogan.
Yeah, barely.
Like, just talked and like was just a person. He wasn't a brand for a minute. And right. That's really important, I think, to see in people like that, because these images that we have of people like Jeff Bezos, like Steve Jobs, like Bill Gates, they're all manufactured images, it feels like, a lot of the time, where it's like you're not actually seeing that person, you're seeing what that person wants you to think that they are. And there's like a lack of,
a lot of us are guilty of that, though, right?
Yeah, but I feel like it's especially true the more famous you get, where image becomes this thing, and especially if you get, a monetary aspect involved with that image, where you have to preserve, because then that's your lifeline, basically. It's not because you have more money that could, sink 1,000 boats, but, but it's still viewed as like that, they just look at their image with dollar signs. So like it holds them back from getting to be real people, because they're so busy projecting, what they think, people view them as, basically.
It's like their brand, sort of. They're more of a brand than they are like a person.
Yeah, but Elon, like, and that was like one of the things that kind of swung me around to him, because I've always been unsure. Like, he's a super rich guy, but he's making good moves. Like, the fact that he is trying to do so much to revolutionize energy. I would really love to see how he's going to continue leading the charge on that. That's. And he's obviously not he's not the first person to really try to get into clean energy, especially with automobiles. Mm-hmm. But that's still a huge part of it. It's those options that are going to drive people like Ford to release one of their most popular models as a hybrid. That's huge. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of why I was like thinking that was really wholesome of him. Like, he could have done the dickhead, like, like, mine's still way better. Like, he could have bragged about like the battery life, or like he could have taken a shot, but instead he was like, good, this is exactly what I wanted to do. Like, I want you guys to try to outdo me, because then I'm just going to try to outdo you. And then this whole thing is just going to start to become better and better, mm-hmm. more efficient, more considering of, the damage that it can do to our environment. And that's super important. So, so like, in all the things I say about, billionaires and rich people and what bastards they are, like, there are exceptions, and they're probably not all bad people, but the problem is that they've, just committed to themselves to this idea of, I need more for me, and they're totally neglecting the people who have actually built the apparatus that is, shooting money at them at these absurd rates right now.
Yeah.
And if you temper it a little bit, you would probably still get more money than you have right now, because a well-oiled, efficiently cared for machine is going to run better than one that's neglected. And that's really the case that we have right now.
Mm-hmm. And I saw one of the things you shared and another friend of mine shared, and I commented on his and not yours, was they used the word seize. They were talking about billionaires, and if we seize their money, I think the number was like $65 trillion or something insane. And yeah. I think as a exercise to like put it into scale, I think it was useful. But I personally have a problem with the word seize, because it implies like an act of war, And I don't know about you, but I'm not prepared to go to war with the billionaires. I've started reading The Art of War recently, mm-hmm. and one of the things it talks about in there is like you don't engage in a battle that you can't win, and nope. you don't press forward without a plan, and like I don't know how we would win against them, They're control the military, and one thing for sure is you don't go to war with the U.S. military. That probably is a poor strategy,
Mm-hmm. But I think the reality is that what is the military comprised of? Working class people who are just trying to survive and are getting, totally, cheated by these people mm-hmm. who enlist them. They short them on pay. They deploy them for ridiculous amounts of time. When they come back, there's a lack of quality or access to services that they need. Yep. And I think, if you could, because really the key to any kind of revolution, if that's, kind of what you're looking at, is military support. Whoever has the military support wins, hands down. And it's really the question of who is, the working class guy from Kansas who enlisted to the infantry. Like, is he going to listen to orders to mow down, a crowd of people? I don't personally think so. Like, I think people like to think of our soldiers as like horrible monsters who will just like follow any order, but I don't. I know a lot of people in the military. They're not bad people. A lot of them are very good people mm-hmm. who signed up for a noble reason. Now, I personally think that they've been misled and abused and used for other people's gains mm-hmm. as opposed to what they signed up for. And it's bridging that gap of again making people understand that this is a class conflict. And like you said, we can't go to war, but the problem is it's already been declared on us. It was declared on us back in the 70s, with Nixon and Reagan, and it's a conflict that has been ignored, and now you have. Luckily, I didn't think I would see a candidate like Bernie Sanders in my time. Like, I was pretty convinced after Obama that like it was just all going to be, people with that talk really nice and like they say nice things, because I got fooled by Obama in 2008. He was this great speaker and he was passionate.
So, man, he was smooth as butter.
Oh my God. I want to introduce 2019 Obama to 2008 Obama, because that guy had a good vision of what was going to happen. But then, he got in and it was so clear, and then it made me realize how quickly the wool got pulled over my eyes there, because the evidence was there. Ironically enough, the Hillary supporters of the 2008 election were talking about, he's a fraud. Like, he has all these establishment ties. Like, he went to Harvard Law School, like, no, sorry, not Harvard. Like, he went to the University of Chicago, like, and like he's a big city liberal, basically. He's one of us. He's not gonna do what he's saying he's gonna do, which was interesting, because a lot of people shushed him off at that time because they just thought Hillary was upset that he took her nomination, and she might have been, but she was also telling the truth. Weirdly enough, which is another interesting thing, is like you can't always just discount somebody's opinion because historically they're full of shit. Right. There's moments where Hillary Clinton was the canary in the coal mine, telling you what's going to happen, if you vote for this guy.
Yeah.
And, all the things he was promising, and that he just wasn't going to be able to deliver. And the thing I would disagree with her on is, she implied that he wouldn't be able to deliver because there's not enough popular support for the things that he wanted. But I think the reality was that there wasn't enough legislative support, and there wasn't a real big drive, because that's where policy gets created. The president is like, a lot of people talk about what Trump's doing, and a president is basically a figurehead who goes for photo ops. He sits down with world leaders and they talk awkwardly in front of a camera for 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And then, he gets daily briefings from people who actually know things and, are in the minutia of what's going on. And, so like a president is a figurehead. He technically in the American system, he is the head of state. And he's the chief of state, but doesn't really have a lot of legislative power. He can outline a vision, he can introduce legislation, but it comes down to the legislature at the end of the day. And it's, congressional elections, midterm elections see a massive drop off of participation compared to presidential.
So one of the good things I like about our system is the separation of powers, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And I forget if this is something I talked about on the podcast the other day with Gail. I think it might have been. But the fact that the president has veto power is effectively a legislative power, right? And I wonder if that's wise to give the president so much legislative power in that way.
I mean, but, at the same time, the courts could also, dictate that his veto could have been unconstitutional, depending on the reasoning for it. Mm-hmm. So there's still people could appeal the veto. They could introduce the legislation again, when he's booted out of office. So it's like, it technically is, kind of almost a little trap there where like you give this person like really the final decision, but they're going to have to answer for the decision at some point. And that's kind of the beauty of our system is either they're going to answer for it when they're in office, which is the preferable scenario, or they're going to have to answer for it when they're out, and we could just try again, basically.
It just seems unfair to me because the executive branch already has so much power, and then they have that power, and like the legislative and judicial branches, they don't have any like teeth, like nothing that they do has teeth really,
Mm-hmm.
like they can't enforce anything almost, So it's like,
yeah. And like, do you say that like that's, a lot of the consequence of that is the Patriot Act, the NDAA, all of these things that added all of these executive powers because we wanted a strong, like, I don't know, like essentially a military dictatorship style level of power for the president where they can just issue executive orders, like, of whatever, they can declare war without congressional consent.
I have a bullet point on here for Star Wars. I think we brought it up, but the Star Wars thing that comes to mind is I think Padme Amidala says it. It's like, this is how democracy dies, with thunderous applause. Yep.
And that's the really what happened. People were so eager after 9/11 because again, like we talked about at the beginning of this, how trauma affects you.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have 9/11, which is basically a meteor of trauma that just like impacted into this country one day.
Right.
And, that had so many reverberating effects on people that I don't think we even understand them yet. Just how much one singular trauma, impacted at one place that's kind of like a symbol of America. It's New York City. That's like, it's probably what most people in the 50s in Europe would be like, oh, it's New York City. Like it was this like iconic, thing.
Yeah, it's like a symbolic heart of our country, sort of. It's not the capital, but it's like what you think of when you think of the U.S.
Right. It's a very American city. Like it's unique in that sense, and that like there's not a lot of cities that were like it, before.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, but that's more so a cultural thing, and you can say that about a lot of cities. There's real capitals, and then there's things, there's spiritual capitals. There's the cultural capitals. There's all these things. But again, like it was this, all this trauma that just hit at once, and it resulted in just people surrendering all of our checks and balances towards the executive branch because a reassuring voice attached to George W. Bush was telling us this is how we're going to stay safe, and he appealed to fear essentially. and fear has dictated our policies ever since.
And I spent a good bit of time and from my teenage years into my maybe early 20s being vocal about September 11th and basically trying to communicate to people that I believed it was an inside job. And I pretty much burned myself out on it emotionally. Mm-hmm. So I haven't really gone back to that well in a long time. And the details are sort of fuzzy at this point, but to me, it's very clear that they took advantage of the situation. Whether or not they actually perpetrated it or not is kind of uncertain, but they definitely cashed in on that opportunity to move the pieces into the available space that kind of opened up when people were like, yeah, whatever you need to do to keep us safe, like do it.
Yeah.
And like, yep, we'll gladly take all those things. No problem. We'll take care of you, Mm-hmm. Here we are still dealing with the consequences 18 years more than that later.
Yeah. And, it's really interesting to see. And it's what makes you realize just how much in the same club the Republicans and the Democrats are when something like the Patriot Act reauthorization comes up. You had 6 Democratic senators who voted against it. Those other Democratic senators in their off time talk about how Trump is the most dangerous president who has ever graced has ever been in the office. He's a psychopath. He's a narcissist. He's selfish. He's greedy. He's racist. He's homophobic. He's literally the worst person 364 days out of the year for those people. But when the order comes up to continue the allowance of, surveying on American citizens without their consent or without a warrant, when it comes up to, the president's ability to declare war, when it comes to, increasing the military budget, I can't think of the last time that the Democrats voted against, as a party, a military spending increase, even for quote unquote the most dangerous person who has ever been in the office. Apparently he's not dangerous enough to not continue pumping money into the military. We want to make sure he has a nice, strong military and a surveillance state on top of that. But he's dangerous. Trust me. That's really, and that's why I find a lot of the Democrats just critiques of him just so empty. It's a show, and it's so obvious based on their actions that they don't really think he's the most. This impeachment hearing has been a circus. And it's so funny watching the coverage from somebody like MSNBC or CNN or any of these neoliberal, talking heads where it's just he's the worst. He's the most he's going to come down. And they're just peddling this nonsense to people who are eating it up because it keeps them distracted and it makes them think that, Trump's going to go down any day. I don't need to worry. They're taking care of it.
Right.
But the reality is that Trump isn't going away,
Probably not.
He has a massive dedicated following. If the Democrats don't get their act together, he's going to win in 2020. And they're going to be scratching their heads.
Of the candidates that are currently in the field right now, who do you feel most strongly about? Who do you think can actually win? Talk about that for a little bit. Who do you like there?
I mean, I have a lot of bias towards Bernie Sanders. He's got a record a mile long of just fighting for exactly what we're talking about. A counterbalance of compassion to the capitalistic system, not destroying capitalism, enhancing it. That we can. It doesn't have to be capitalism minus if you add a socialistic element to it. It's actually going to result in a net positive for the overall growth of the machine. So I mean, he's probably my favorite. He has a lot of pretty stupid takes. Nuclear energy being at the top of the list. I hate his.
What does he say about nuclear energy?
It's just that it's we need to shut down nuclear energy. Basically, he wants to push for wind and solar, geothermal. But the energy, the answer to the energy crisis is nuclear. Unless some other groundbreaking technology comes to light, that is the solution right now. And all of this effort to try and clamp down on it, reference things like Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island when you're talking about nuclear energy in the 21st century. It's extremely damaging to the solution to that problem. So I don't like him there. I still think he has a good chance of winning.
That was my next question: is do you think he can win?
He has a lot of support, and it's the real question of how much does popular support really matter? It doesn't really come down to basically who the elites pick. I think if Bernie Sanders wins the nomination, we're finally going to have a real answer to that question. Because people say that Barack Obama was a change candidate and that he was a revolutionary going to get in there and shake things up. But he wasn't, and I think the establishment knew that before he got in. He had obviously, worked it out with them that like, I'm just going to get elected based off my charm. And, I'm going to say the right things that I know these people want to hear. He played us like a fiddle. Like it was almost like impressive, like how good he was able to sell that lie, but at the same time, it woke me up, which was really good. It made me understand that like, charisma is important, but it is not everything. You need to parse through that shell that they're putting up, and you need to really take a look at the person.
Obama has charisma. Trump, say what you want about him, he's got charisma.
He can work a crowd. I think there's a difference. I think there is a distinction between that.
Does Bernie have the charisma necessary to work a crowd, or is that important?
Yeah, man. Like his rallies are just as high energy as Trump's. Like people love him, And I think again, part of what people love about him is that he's authentic. It's part of what people love about Trump too, is that he's just a guy. He's a pretty interesting guy, I'll put it that way, but he's just a dude, at the end of the day. Like obviously he's a billionaire, he's grown up in immense amounts of privilege, and he's had a totally different life from anybody that actively supports him. But he's convinced people that he's one of them, that I'm just a regular guy, like, and it's because he is. He never bought into that corporate image, that corporate shell that gets put over people.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly, I think that's the biggest part of why he won. The second biggest being people just wanted to throw a Molotov, through the window. And he was like, hey, man, light me up. I'm ready to go. And
oh, man.
But I mean, but the reality is that Bernie is a different kind of, Molotov to throw through there. It's a more targeted one. It's one that I think is actually going to take the problem seriously, which is that you have massive corporate influence and just massive monetary influence in our government right now. And government needs to exist as an apparatus that protects people, not one that protects corporations. Corporations can protect themselves. They're fine. They can hire $1 million attorneys for, every single case that they need to fight, work with. They can handle it. They don't need to continue having, a neutered EPA, neutered worker protections, the union busting. Like that is so unhelpful to the overall health of our civilization. And it's like having an alcoholic dad, where they're just like, constantly doing shit that hurts the family, but they're there, so you have to deal with them, and you have to live with them. And it's a lot of selfishness there, but that's what I like about Bernie. He's got a track record, of really fighting for this stuff where it mattered.
That's the same thing Gail said as well when she was on the podcast last week or the week before. Was the track record, the voting record, it kind of speaks for itself. So
he's got flaws, and I won't ever deny that. Like I said, the nuclear energy one is huge for me. I think that's an incredibly dangerous and irresponsible position to be taking in the 21st century with all that we've learned and we know about nuclear disasters and how to prevent them. There's at a certain point we need to accept the risk, because the other risk is that the world's power grid becomes too strained to support our current level of living. Right. People aren't going to be happy with oil and gas when there's curfew blackouts, basically, where from 9 p.m. and on your power's shut off because we can't sustain the grid. You see that in a lot of developing countries, and I think people don't understand how fragile our energy system is.
Right. So and this whole topic is that's like my bread and butter, so I'm pretty well versed and opinionated on it too. And I understand what you're saying about it being an important piece of the energy puzzle, and I also understand the fear of things gone wrong, you know?
Yeah.
And I used to make the joke of like, the problem with the nuclear plant is like Homer Simpson works there,
Yeah.
And he'll screw it up, But I realize now that that's like not necessarily true. Like
Yeah.
my mom's boyfriend, he works at a nuclear power plant. He's like a nuclear technician of some kind, and like he's not Homer Simpson. He's like super anal retentive and like super detail oriented and like a hardworking dude, And
yeah, they vet people, to work in a nuclear plant. You can't just be some schmo who walks in off the street and like suddenly decide that you can work there. Like you have to be paying attention, and I think that's important and that's good, But people don't. People, like you said, they have that conception that like Homer's punching the clock there, and he's just pressing buttons, and God knows what happens. And but it's again, it's a lot of fear mongering, and that's
it's kind of, you almost have to think about it like what's it called, like risk
assessment.
Risk assessment. That's the word I was looking for. Like if there is a disaster, how bad is it, and then multiply that by the likelihood, or kind of you bracket the likelihood of like highly likely, lowly likely, like how.
Yeah, I mean, but I think the really important aspect of nuclear power, though, is that it's a natural process. It's not, it's something that has rules. It has bounds that can be observed and understood. And if people were given the ability to research, breakthroughs in nuclear energy, on a much larger level, because it's happening right now. There's I ran into a nuclear engineering student, like literally hit his bike with my car, and like we got to talking afterwards. Like he was good. Like some of his electronics got a little messed up, but he was like. He's a cool dude about it, It's Gainesville, so there's a lot of bikers. There's a lot of bad, bad pullouts, and like you can't really see all the time.
Right.
But and he was talking about what he does, and because I told him I'm a programmer, like I write software for like an engineering company / construction company, and he was like, yeah, well I'm actually going to be a nuclear engineer, so I'm going to study like how to handle a reactor, how a reactor can be improved. There's people learning all of these important skills about how to facilitate a safe, nuclear environment. And I don't know if there wasn't so much fear mongering, because that's actually something him and I got into, was just the amount of paranoia around it. And again, because of things like 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, people have this huge aversion to even the idea of nuclear power. But I mean, my main argument to that, though, is you can't compare pre-information age Soviet and American tech with 21st century capabilities and knowledge. Those were two disasters that taught nuclear physicists and nuclear engineers an immense amount about how a nuclear reaction can go wrong. And how do you prevent that? What are the fail-safes that are needed? And, I think if people were able to get over the fear that that's something that could actually be transformed relatively simply, there is no shortage of nuclear fuel at this point. A lot of it's being used for weapons. So I don't know.
And then what about
we need to get into the 21st century with? Yeah, but again, like you get down to the, it's mismanagement. It's not following the rules, basically. Like a nuclear reaction has clear guidelines of, how you need to be cooling the cores, how you need to have fail safes in place, and like the protocols that are in place to handle a meltdown or a shutdown, So, and it's come out in all the reports, that they weren't following those rules. And that's why, so laziness just creates this bad image of nuclear power, because people can't be bothered to give it the care and attention that it deserves. It's like a microcosm of the economy, of like these people just don't care, whatever, it's running fine, it'll be fine. And then it literally blows up and starts dumping irradiated water to the Pacific Ocean,
Yeah. Makes you think about cars, because cars are kind of like that too. It's like, they're relatively safe. Most of the time you don't die, If you're like drunk speeding while texting, you're probably going to die, or someone's going to die, something bad's going to happen, Yeah, it's tricky. In general, I'm pro nuclear, just to kind of be clear there.
No, same.
But I do understand the hesitancy, and if we do move forward with it, we should be super, super careful because we don't want to, you know.
It needs to be treated as seriously as it is.
Right.
You know, because it has the potential to cause enormous, lasting damage. You know, it's not just, you know, like when an oil refinery goes up where it's just a fire that's burning. Like, no, this is environmental destruction, you know, for hundreds of years. Yeah. I mean, look at Pripyat. Like, it's still uninhabitable.
You know? Where did you say?
That's where the Chernobyl reactor went down.
Oh, Chernobyl,
it's Pripyat, Ukraine. It was a smallish city, you know, in Ukraine, and then the Chernobyl meltdown happened, and now it's, you know, irradiated. You know, you can't stay in certain parts of it for too long, without, you know, massively increasing your exposure to radiation.
Yeah.
You know, but that's the reality of it, and obviously that drives a lot of fear. Like, that scares the hell out of me. The thought that literally just being somewhere, like with no other, you know, external, you know, pressure, can just kill you. Like, that's a terrifying prospect.
It is.
And so I get it, but I also, like, again, I think that's a bad comparison, because you're talking, again, pre-information area, Soviet technology and understanding, and American in the case of 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile wasn't quite as bad, but it's still, you know, it wasn't good.
No.
So it's, you know, but again, it was just like they had this lack of understanding of, you know, what they were dealing with, and just how critical and serious it really was. And, you know, if those considerations aren't, you know, really put to the forefront when you're having a debate about it, I think a lot of people just shut off about nuclear power. They don't, like, not near my house, basically.
Yeah, the old NIMBY.
Yeah,
my backyard move. Yeah. All right, let's jump to some different subjects here. I'm going to tie these 3 subjects together, and we can figure out which direction to take it. So one is this post that I saw recently where someone was talking about how God made Trump president. And we all kind of got a good chuckle at that, and, like, the obvious contradictions and the whole idea there with, like, your religious beliefs, if any, with also Dr. Jordan Peterson, who you and I talked about a little bit too. That was a while ago. That was probably a year or 2 ago. We brought him up. And studying his work has been super helpful for me personally. So I guess, where do you sit with all of that? Like, how do you, I mean, I think you're probably atheistic.
Yeah. I mean, I'd probably lean myself more towards agnostic, just because, like,
remind me what the difference is.
Agnostic is basically saying I don't know. Atheist is saying there's no God. You know, a lot of agnostics, like, you know, I would say a lot that there's no God, but it's really not like a categorical statement. It's just kind of like almost like an innocent until proven guilty, you know, of belief, I guess.
Right. Okay.
Where it's like, you know, I'm not going to buy into it because I don't personally see the things that people give as evidence for it as, you know, evidence. They're coincidences. They're, you know, it's humans loving to establish patterns and things. We love to.
We're really good at that.
Yeah, it's what has enabled us to be what we are. But I mean, at the same time, you know, when it starts to infect, you know, not infect, but when it starts to creep into, you know, your thought process, and, you know, you start to look at everything through that lens of God did this. You know, he sent me these signs. He did, like, I feel like you're missing out on a lot of meaningful understanding of the world, you know, and your place in events, and how, like, you can control them to a certain, like, extent. You know, you can, you know, dictate your circumstances to a degree, and I feel like there's a lot of surrender of that, where people just kind of, they just accept everything that happens, you know, and they don't really question why it happened, or could I have prevented it, you know. Like, had I been more considering of certain variables, could that have not happened the way that it did? I think it encourages people to stop thinking. Kind of quoting Sam Harris a little bit in that one.
Yeah.
But it's, like, you know, you do see it a lot.
It's like, if, you know, maybe you should grab the wheel and. Yeah. I understand that.
I'm not going to sit here and begrudge anybody for having a personal religious belief, but I think when it becomes the guiding principle of your life, it starts, it wears away at your actual, conceptions of morality, because people get into absolutes with a lot of religious belief.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the more orthodox you get, you start to see that real rigidity and that binary of like, this is good, this is bad, this is always bad no matter what, and don't even think about anything else. Just, we're telling you what is and what isn't.
Right.
And it encourages that end of internalization and self-dialogue.
Yep. Self-dialogue. That's kind of the direction I wanted to go, because one of the things I learned from studying Dr. Peterson's work is he talks about Israel, like the name Israel, and who the hell was it? I think it was, I can't remember, but one of the characters in the Bible had their name changed from, maybe it was Abraham, or maybe,
oh man,
doesn't matter.
It's been a while for me.
The name was changed to Israel, which translates to struggles with God.
Yeah.
Right? And that's, I think, the important piece, is to have that internal struggle. Like, you have to think about it. You have to have that dialogue. You can't accept anything that's handed to you as factual or useful until you've internalized it and been like, okay, wait, really? Is this what are we saying now? And why are we saying this? And what does this do for me? And how does this play out? Like, you have to have that struggle, or else you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, And it kind of breaks my heart, as like this kind of, the whole subject of religion feels to me as like one of the biggest misunderstandings of the modern era. People who are atheistic / agnostic that throw it out as completely useless, nothing in their value whatsoever, to the people who, like you said, are entrenched in the dogma and the orthodoxy and like live in that rigidity and like attack people for doing things differently. Like, there's ancient wisdom in these stories, and not just the Bible. Like, whether you look at like the Egyptian stories, or like the ancient Mesopotamian stories, or Judaism or Christianity, there's like lots of wisdom in there.
Yeah.
That if you looked at it,
because there's situations of people, they're literally giving you, and this kind of goes for all religious texts and mythologies. Like, they're especially when they're story based like that, with characters that you can ground yourself to.
Right.
It's literally you getting to do something that nobody gets to do, which is watch, situations from afar, basically, and but still project yourself into it, and try to understand how this person acted, why they acted the way that they did, and
where it led you.
There's, but I think there is a massive amount of literary quality, that you can derive from pretty much any religious text. I mean, some of them are obviously less quality than others, but I think that for most, though, even Greek myths, that's you can look at the Greek gods essentially as manifestations of different versions of the 7 deadly sins. The vanity, the wrath, the the lust. There's all of these things that they're universal, and we can understand. So I think the trap a lot of people fall into with this is that they think that morality is objective, that there is always a right and there's always a wrong. But I think the reality really is that, based off of how morality is cultivated, which is over time, based off of cultural influences and pressure and, interactions with others, it's entirely subjective. But with that, but people think that's a bad thing, because then they think that means, well, you can just do whatever you want. It's like, well, yes, but it also means that you can, start to put a measure on the morality of actions. There's a great book by Sam Harris called The Moral Landscape.
I need to study more Sam Harris. I know he and Jordan Peterson have had some interesting conversations, and I've listened to him on Rogan and things, but I need to dig a little deeper into Sam Harris's work.
He's an incredibly smart, and he's very articulate. And he writes a lot about religion, but he writes a lot more about the science of the brain. He's a neuroscientist. So this book that he wrote, the moral the moral landscape, it outlines this idea that with every decision that is made, whether it's on the smallest scale or the largest scale, you can measure basically how moral it is by the outcome of human happiness. Does it make people happy in the end?
I like that.
So he said that, in outlining that you can look at decisions as a mountainscape, basically, with peaks and valleys, where you have, these choices of, making difficult decisions, but ultimately they're going to, lead to a peak of human happiness where people are, self-fulfilled and, their basic needs are met and, so there's, but I think again, like when you get into religion, that it almost advocates shutting off that dialogue because God outlined what's right and what's wrong, and you see it more. I don't want to say always, but you see it more in religious literalists.
Yeah, they're the worst. I can't. Yeah. I'm not. So,
like that. That's really where the issues kind of starts to come in, like where somebody is leading off with the belief that this book is immutable, it's immortal, it is infallible. That's you can't argue against that. Like again, to reference Sam Harris, he's got a great quote, which he's saying, if somebody doesn't value logic, what logical argument can you make to them to get them to value it? And if they don't value evidence, then what evidence are you going to show them to convince them that they should? And religion creates a big barrier for that, where it tells you what's right and what's wrong. It tells you in no uncertain terms. It tries to say how the earth was created in the case of Genesis. But the interesting part about the Bible is that the Old Testament obviously is the book of the Jewish people,
right?
And outside of the most Orthodox, like I don't know if there's a pervasive trend of literalism like in the Old Testament, but Christians, like especially the more conservative ones, there's a lot of like a belief in the creation theory, like which is an Old Testament story. So it's like, Christianity, obviously because the Bible is a two-parter, although I'd argue that the God from the first book is a very different. They recasted him before the second book because he is totally different in the second one. There was some Disney style studio meddling going on there, where they're like, no, would it just make him more compassionate? Just like he comes on a little strong in the first half, guys. like an editor kind of going through it. But like, and it's interesting to see that though, that like the Judaism only really accepts the Old Testament as the Word of God, but Christianity, in a lot of cases, accepts both the Old Testament and the New Testament, even though they're wildly contrasting books that massively contradict each other in a lot of ways. And not just in content, but in application by people too.
It feels like for me in Genesis is probably what I've studied most, especially those early parts of Genesis. Like God is like a character that's like necessary to move the plot forward. It's like you don't think of him necessarily as like a person, but like
just an agent of the plot, essentially.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't even really get involved until much later, sort of as like doing anything. Actually,
weirdly enough, based on that, he's probably not the main character of the Old Testament.
Yeah, he's not.
They're usually like not present for the whole first half. Then, that's
it's tricky because, I've for so long I've identified as atheist, agnostic, somewhere in between, and now to have extracted real value from these stories, to be stuck in the middle yet again, except for not this time. It's not red team, blue team. It's like religious and non-religious, and I feel like I have things to say to both of them, and it's like
it's a sliding scale.
Yeah. And then you have like back to the Star Wars thing. You have like pop culture kind of acting as like modern religion in a sense. I mean,
consumerism just as a whole is a religion at this point.
Well, that too, but really what I mean is like, what am I trying to say? Like for example, let's talk about the Avengers for a minute. Have you seen all the Avengers movies? You're all up to date on all that. No spoilers. Spoiler alert for anybody watching this. You haven't seen it?
Spoiler alert at the bottom of the screen. skip to this time code to see our spoiler-free review.
Captain America is effectively the Christ figure. Like he lays himself on the line. Like in the first movie, he like jumps on the grenade to protect his fellow man, you know? Mm-hmm. And Iron Man is more the Luciferian figure. You know, he's really super intelligent, you know? And the difference between the two characters is Captain America is obsessed with doing the right thing. Meanwhile, Iron Man is obsessed with doing the thing right. Yeah. And they're not the same thing. It leads to conflict in most of the movies. They're butting heads with each other because kind of the Luciferian mindset is like, don't worry, I got this. I'm smart enough to solve all these problems. And like, it's almost like the difference between like individualism and collectivism. Like Iron Man's like, don't worry, I'll just solve everyone's problems and just give me the responsibility and everything will be fine. And Captain America's like, no. We can't do that. Like we have to give individual like rights and responsibilities and let that push the world to wherever it goes, you know? Mm. And you see them fight this out over so many movies, you know? And what's characteristic of the Christ figure is like that self-sacrifice that Captain America is always willing to do. Like every time he has the opportunity to put his life on the line, he does it, you know? Yeah. Where every time Iron Man has to put his life on the line, he's hesitant. He's always like almost annoyed. He's like, oh, I gotta do this shit again. Like again, like what? It's like, why don't you just leave me alone? Like I'm just trying to do this thing, you know? But ultimately, what does he do? Ultimately, though, you know,
he does it.
Yeah. He kind of, and that's like the redemption piece, you know. It's like what they say of like, as long as you take Christ into your life before you die, you get into heaven, you know. And it's like, for so long, I'm like, well, that's stupid. Like that's the dumbest shit I ever heard. But if you look at not literally, you know, what it's really saying is like, you have a chance for redemption all the way up until the end. You know, all you have to do is be willing to give your life for truth and love and your fellow man, and ultimately that's what he does, and he saves the day. You know, and then I'm sitting there crying in the movie theater, you know, over this shit, you know, and talking about it nonstop, and it's like, they've taken all of these things from our religious stories and built them into a new dynamic, like a new setup with new characters, but they're gods in a sense. Like one of them's Thor, you know. Yeah. It's like, you know, it's and
literally gods in some cases.
Right. Yeah, Thor and Loki and Odin and I think it's such a cool story and it's just all the pieces of it, and I think they really did a good job too. I mean, DC needs to take a page out of their book. I mean, they haven't made a good movie since
they've been
Dark Knight.
I want to say they've been trying, but they really, really haven't. Like they thought that what they needed in their movies was more pop music and more jokes, but like what they really needed was, like you said, like the foundations for a good story and a good redemption arc, you know. That's what sells, you know, to people. It's everyone loves, you know, somebody striving against all odds and eventually succeeding. But like with DC, it's just like a very, like I really like the concept of like that. What if superheroes were real? You know, like this is what they are. But I would say that The Boys does that infinitely better than any of the DC.
Who does?
Film. It's an Amazon show actually called The Boys.
Oh, I've never seen that.
Yeah, so it's basically the Justice League, but it's like if the Justice League was purchased and is now owned by a horrible corporation.
Oh, Jesus.
Like uses their image, and so like, but they're just horrible assholes. Yeah. You know, they're the worst. They're what superheroes would be. You know, if you gave a normal person just this insane amount of godlike power, like they'd be the worst, and everyone would be terrified of that person. Like
they would abuse it.
And that's really what it sells. Like, and there's a couple, you know, DC like comic storylines that go down that road of like an evil Superman, which is really the center frame of that show The Boys. And yeah, like so it like they could do it interesting, but they could tell interesting stories about real relatable people doing real relatable people things, and like and dress it up in all the costumes and the CGI and all that. But like I think the biggest critique a lot of DC stuff gets is just story. That's where they fail.
Speaking of, have you seen Joker?
I actually haven't yet, but I've heard a lot of good things. I've watched a couple reviews of it. I don't really go to movie theaters anymore.
Yeah.
I kind of hate the public. Um, like I know that's, but like especially movie theaters, I don't know. I can't enjoy a movie in that kind of environment.
No.
Like, no, it's just that there's too much outside noise and distraction happening for me to like actually get into it. And,
Oh,
like,
really?
yeah,
I almost
like
feel the opposite. Like I almost feel like when you go there, it's worth the $13.50 just so you're not on your phone and not like hearing sirens go by your house or the phone's ringing or like it kind of limits the distractions and you're able to immerse yourself in that world a little bit more easily, a little bit more less interference, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the exact opposite. And it's probably because like I'm pretty introverted, you know, like that's a pretty, you know, foundational part of my, you know, my type there.
Right.
And yeah. So I don't necessarily not like crowds, you know, I do fine at parties, like, you know, I can be charming and sociable and like, you know, I just don't prefer to for the most part. Like it's just like you just want to shut it off sometimes.
You think it's related to the annoyed aspect that we talked about earlier? Is it like an annoyance that you feel, or is it just like
no, probably just like a feel. You know, I like solitude sometimes. Like I really just enjoy being on my own and reflecting on my own like thoughts and stuff like that. So, you know, sometimes it's more healthy than other times.
Sure.
But for the most part, like I feel more recharged, more relaxed, and like, you know, I can kind of take time to just, you know, look at myself a little bit,
right?
Know, free of all those distractions and interactions, you know, and having to like, you know, maintain, you know, all of this stuff. Because you know we talked about it earlier, but you know, it's not just people like Jeff Bezos or corporations that have a shell. Like we all do in a sense.
Yep.
And like, I guess mine is that, you know, public personality, because I'm pretty different. Like, obviously here, like I'm not very, you know, I'm not as argumentative. You know, when I'm in person, like I'm pretty accepting, you know, of challenges and, you know, things I don't necessarily agree with.
Sure.
And, you know, yeah. So I mean, people have different layers of their, you know, their consciousness that. Some they show to others and some are just for them. And like, I like having mine that's just for me, you know. I think it's healthy and good for you.
Yeah. So, well, I won't spoil Joker on you then, but I will say that.
Oh, it already has been. You're good.
Oh.
Yeah. No, like I said, I watched a bunch of reviews for it. I'm going to wait until I'll basically see it on VOD. But it looks great. It's everything I've heard is like overwhelmingly positive about it. So.
Well, it was, you know, not to we were ragging on DC, so I had to kind of tip my cap to them there. But it's also separate, sort of, from all of the other stuff that they're doing
from the Snyderverse.
Yeah, exactly, with the laser beams and explosions and stuff.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think the only thing I'll say about it, because I don't want to get it too much into it if you haven't seen it, you know what I mean. But
that's fine.
I think the thing that I really like when a movie tells you in the beginning what it's about without really telling you. Like they give you like a really good clue, you know?
Yeah.
Beginning starts with like this really intense scene of like the Joker looking in the mirror and he's doing like this. Like making a smile.
Yeah.
And he's like this. And he's like, you know? And like what they're telling you there, I think, what their director, the writer, whatever, was trying to tell you is like this story is about this character's choice that they're going to have to make about whether their life and their story of their life is a comedy or a tragedy, because that's like the classic theater. That's the only choices, right? Either it's a tragedy or it's a comedy, and the character has a lot of opportunities to make his life a comedy. And you'd think as a Joker, it would be a comedy, right? And he even makes that reference towards the end of the movie when he's talking to Murray on the couch. He says something like, I thought my life was a tragedy. Turns out it was a comedy, right? But he's like, at this point, he's living in like a delusional state, you know? Because it is a tragedy. The things that he's doing and the things, you know, destroying his life and this, and it's also, I think, a really good reminder of like the cyclical nature of the individual and the societal. You know, like we think we're on this island. It's like, well, whatever I do, it's just me and it doesn't really matter. And it's like, that's not true at all. Like, you feed into the world and the world feeds into you and then you feed in the world and it's like constantly on that rotation, you know? And like, had he had the courage or the whatever you want to call it, to pump the brakes even a little bit on what he was doing, the world wouldn't have been ended in such a tragedy.
Yeah.
But instead, he perpetuates it by pushing everything forward. No, it was a crazy. I really liked it.
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing it. Like it's I've heard pretty much every minute of the plot by this point.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still excited to see, like, because that kind of stuff never, like, I don't care about spoilers. Like, I'm more interested in the execution and, like, kind of seeing it play out, because just reading about it online, like, doesn't have the same impact on me as having it in front of me, and, like, I can actually watch, like, the minor tweaks of a character's face, and, like, you can start to notice those little details that, like, the person that you read the review of totally missed, but you weren't struggling to get the basic plot, and miss all that stuff. So almost like doing your homework before you watch it, which I don't know, it's a more enjoyable experience for me. Like, then you can kind of start seeing the pieces unfold, like, but then you can also notice things that they missed, because you're not so busy on that first blind playthrough, basically.
I thought I was like, it was a masterpiece, I think.
Yeah.
And as someone who's
I've definitely heard that.
Like, I don't necessarily consider myself an artist exactly, but, like, this is content creation, and, like, there's an art form to conversation and stuff. So I really try to, like, appreciate a masterpiece when you see one, and I think it qualifies as such.
Yeah. Well, I mean, hey, good for them. Like, after the run of terrible movies that they cranked out, like, they needed a hit, And I'm glad they got it, because I really like a lot of DC characters. They're a little bit more grounded and realistic than Marvel stuff. Yeah, well, I mean, Batman, like, even the Joker, though, at a certain coin, like, he's just a guy. He's not a superpowered mutant. He's not a god who traveled here for me. He's just some asshole. And I think that's the greatest part of DC's stories, is that, like, they really play up how much impact, I guess, one individual with a philosophy and a lot of drive can do. Like,
I think personally Batman's the best character of all of the characters, but Marvel's got the better setup.
Yeah, they have better stuff for movies. I think DC has a lot of really good storylines that they for some reason didn't go with. Like, if they wanted to do, like, a long form cinematic universe to rival Marvel, there's way better ones than essentially what is The Dark Knight Returns, which is the story where, Batman's a bitter old man in retirement, basically, and then Superman, starts to become a massive threat, and, he starts to try to take him down, essentially, which is the whole plot of Batman v Superman, but, I don't think that's a good launching point for like a massive universe like that. You could have done something simpler, like, the 3 movies in and they were at the Justice League already. Like, Marvel had 4, 5, 6 films, each establishing a specific character. In Iron Man's case, multiple times. Like, he had 2 movies before the Avengers. So, like, there's
they rushed it.
They were just, like, so eager to get out there. Like, oh, look, we're just like Marvel. It's like, well, yeah, but Marvel wasn't Marvel, like, when Iron Man 1 came out.
Yeah.
It was just like this. It was this chance that they were taking, basically, on this wacky plan to adapt comic books into movies. It hadn't really been done well before. Like, all of the previous ones are all really corny, and they're, like, cheaply budgeted, and, like, when you have things like, the Fantastic Four. And, like, I'd say Blade is probably the one that did it best of adapting a comic book, and everybody loved Blade.
Blade was cool.
Yeah, he killed it there. It was a super fun movie, but but, like, nobody had really done, like, a massive scale thing like that. And I think DC, they were just, like, so eager to get in, because they saw that they saw these giant dollar signs, and they just rushed at it.
And that's, I think, another example of, like, when a movie at the beginning of the movie tells you what it's about without telling you what it's about. Like, 2 examples that come to mind is the beginning of Iron Man 1. It starts, like, on Tony's arm. Yeah. That's, like, the first thing you see is, like, Tony drinking a drink in Tony's arm. And it ends with Tony's arm,
Yeah.
And then similarly with Endgame, they kind of well, it's not like an exact example of that, but I think they're kind of showing you that. It's like with the scene with Hawkeye and his daughter, and the quote is like, they're aiming at the target, and he's like, all right, you see where we're going? I was like, all right, well, now we got to figure out how to get there. And I could see like the Marvel team doing that. Like, well, we know Thanos is going to be the enemy, and we know Tony's going to be the one in the end that stops him. But how do we get there? You know, long journey to get there. You know,
yeah, like 10 years of movies.
Yeah,
and
there's something. Yeah. All right, so I have lots of other things here to talk about. I'm gonna shoot you 3, and you pick one.
All right.
Automation and AI, AOC, or healthcare.
Let's go for healthcare. Why not?
So it's the first thing I'll say is it already seems backwards. Like the whole system seems flipped upside down of the way it should be structured. Like, and what I mean by that is my doctor gets paid when I go to the hospital. But like, shouldn't my doctor get paid when I'm not in the hospital? Like, shouldn't there be, you know?
Yeah. That's a really interesting point, actually.
It's bad.
Shouldn't the doctor get paid more when they keep you out rather than when you're constantly there?
Right. It's upside down to begin with, you know?
Yeah.
And then my other major beef is, like, when you go to, I don't know, what's your favorite fast food bullshit restaurant? And you want to order, let's just use McDonald's, because why not?
I'm a Wendy's guy, but sure, I'll go to
Wendy's. You go to Wendy's, right? This podcast is brought to you by Wendy's.
Flavor down there. It's actually not brought to you by Wendy's.
No, not actually by Wendy's. There's a price on the thing. Like, you know how much your thing is.
Yeah.
And like, why don't we have that? Like, why do I have to go and like have no idea what this cost me? And you send me a bill like months later, and the number is like absurd. You know? It's like,
well, it's, you know, a big part of it in American healthcare. I can't even say Western, because it's, you know, there is a pretty important distinction between like Western and Eastern medicine. Like, my girlfriend is actually an acupuncturist, so like we end up talking a lot about, you know, just the failures of Western medicine in a lot of regards, and like with what you talked about, the preventative and the wellness aspect, especially. Like, but you know, this is uniquely American. The idea that health should be a profiteering venture, which is insane. Like, just as a supposition or like a proposition. Yeah. That's an insane idea.
Like, when I go to a concert, for example, like I buy a ticket to go to a concert, like I want to be there. Like, I spent money because I want to be there. Like, nobody wants to be in the hospital.
No.
You know, it's like the last place you want to be.
Yeah, and just again, like as this larger framing of, you know, that we are a one species, you know, and the health of the individual resonates to the health of the collective, you know. So the fact that people would want to instead take away that desire to, you know, provide treatment for illnesses that, you know, may or may not be self-inflicted. Some of them are, some of them aren't, you know. But the idea that people would want to take this idea of healing others and then turn it into, you know, a profit venture, I can't wrap my head around that. That's like, it's, you know, there's charging for medicine, and then there's profiting like exorbitantly off of medicine. And I think we're the only country in the world, the only Western industrialized nation in the world that really has this problem persisting of a profit motive being, you know, the center point of a healthcare system, and a private insurance industry whose literal goal is to take as much money from you as possible and return as little benefit. That is, you know, that is undeniable. That is exactly what an insurance company exists to do. You know, they're the whole reason they're in business is to placate the shareholders, to make money. Yeah. And having to shell out, you know, massive amounts of money for very expensive procedures, you know, that cuts into that. So, yeah. You know, and I mentioned this in posts a lot. You know, people talk about, I don't want socialist death panels deciding if I get the care I need or not, who are perfectly happy to have capitalist death panels deciding if they get the care that they need or not.
Right.
So it's like it's this really interesting juxtaposition to watch people, talk about how I don't want some government bureaucrat denying my cancer treatment. It's like, no, but you're fine with Todd from State Farm denying your cancer treatment. That's the thing. Again, it comes back to the idea that people are willing to accept, raw deals basically on the basis that other people will get worse deals. So,
yeah,
it's a massive problem.
So what do we do about it? Is this something that you think, you mentioned Bernie, is Bernie's plan going to help us out with this? And if so, how?
Honestly, like every civilized society at this point, like in the Western Hemisphere, has some measure of universal health care. And there's clear and obvious benefits to the centralization and deprofitization of medicine. It shouldn't be. There's no, the biggest argument that's made is innovation. That if we reduce the costs of our medicines, if we don't allow Pfizer and Eli Lilly to charge people $1,000 for heart medication, they're not going to be able to develop new heart medications. But that's simply not the case. There's plenty of pharmaceutical companies around the world working in Europe, especially in Germany and places like that, that are having no issues with innovation. They're having no issues with developing better drugs, with developing treatments for things. And it's this really almost selfish and egotistical mindset from America that we are the drivers of all innovation. That we are the center of the world and the center of the universe. That people talk about a heliocentric theory, but there's an American-centric theory of how the world works, that it all revolves around America. And it's a real problem. But I do think Bernie has the best plan on the table. It's I don't know if it's perfect. You'd have to see it in action to know really how good it's going to be. But you have plenty of evidence from other countries around the world that allowing a private company to profit off of the health needs of your citizens is just it's a runaway freight train, and there's you have to stop it.
And it's cyclical too, because the state of wellness is so poor as well. The food that we're eating and the lifestyles that we're lead us to, the stress that we're going through lead us to being unhealthy and needing these services, and then having to shell everything out to get it. I mean, and Gail, the woman that was on here last week, she shared something recently that was like, by the numbers, number of people who have to declare bankruptcy due to healthcare costs. And it's like 0, 0, 0 for all these other countries. And then our number was like insane. And it's like, that's staggering. Like, that's a problem, like you've ruined someone's life from an accident,
Yeah.
That nobody wants to be in.
Yeah. And it's just, it's literally insane, that people are willing to accept that and not consider the idea that there's probably a better way to handle this. But, and again, you talked about, all these different pressures and factors that lead into the real lack of wellness in this country, and stress being the highest one. What's the major cause of stress? Economics. People not having enough money to get by. And so it all ties back to this issue of a system that is just chewing up people because it has the numbers basically to chew up people. But the real reality is it has the numbers to, provide for and, make these people thrive.
Yeah.
It just doesn't want to, because
I've heard the argument, and I saw something you posted recently that kind of touches on this, is like, basically this healthcare provided by employers is sort of used as a weapon, It's like,
oh, absolutely.
I can't quit my job because then I don't have healthcare, And it's like, how are you supposed to start this business? How are you supposed to have take a risk on yourself if you have a family? You can't. You just can't do it, And if anything's stopping innovation, it's probably that, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I couldn't even begin to imagine the number of, possibly successful startups that just got drowned in, all of this, nonsense about healthcare, because we put it on employers at this point, and it shouldn't be in their hands. That's not something that they should have to pay for. That's separate. That benefits everybody, not just the people in that corporation.
Yeah.
So I don't and I think that's a really important thing to bring up with people. That your paycheck gets docked for healthcare right now. Like in most cases,
by a lot.
A lot of companies will maybe hit 50%, but unless you got a great job and they're not paying 100% of your insurance, so you're currently paying for your own healthcare, and then when you go to access it, they can just deny you, and that's unbelievable to me. That people are willing to just accept that, and they're not aggressively pursuing an alternative to a literal public health crisis, because it's only going to get worse. Mm-hmm. The more and more power that, as this silent coup of 40 years of corporations essentially taking over and just infecting our government, as that trap shuts, it is only going to get worse. And, we are in the last chances of being able to break out of that trap right now. I don't think people understand how close we are to living under a total oligarchy right now. I mean, our current president, one of his major claims to office was that he's insanely rich, which isn't a qualification for leadership. That's it can mean that you're clever, it can mean that you're resourceful with handling money, but that's not a leadership quality. It's not a vision for anything. No. It's just like, I have 1 billion marbles, and if you literally had 1 billion marbles, we would lock you up as like an insane hoarder. But you change that to dollars, and suddenly we're elevating them to the level of presidency.
Yeah,
and that's unbelievable to me. That people are unwilling to recognize that at some level of wealth and control and power, like in that need to attain more of it, that it's a mental illness. And obviously there's degrees to that, and I personally don't think Trump is the worst president we've ever had. There's a guy named Franklin Pierce I would suggest a lot of people look into. He was the president before Lincoln, and he's arguably one of the highest contributors to the events that led to the Civil War. He was legitimately the worst person, and he had Nathaniel Hawthorne write his autobiography for him, which was an entire work of fiction that Nathaniel Hawthorne just invented. I think Hawthorne had just written like The Scarlet Letter or something like that. Like there was some really famous novel he'd just written, so he was hot at that time. And then Franklin Pierce called up his old drinking buddy from college, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and had him write his autobiography, which is just full of crap. Wow. And then he got elected on this image of being like this heroic, and he was the worst. He was an alcoholic racist. Like that was basically what he was.
Yeah.
And, so I think people exaggerate with Trump. I think the lucky part with him is how incompetently he handles things, with how much of his hand he shows at every point. Like I would love to sit down and play cards with Donald Trump, because that man, I feel like for all the necessity of like some of the lies that he tells, like especially the more dishonest ones about a historical context. He's a big historical revisionist. I've noticed. We all remember famously the siege of Yorktown Airport, as he was recalling it, when the American colonists took the airports from the British during the Revolutionary War. But there's just an endless list of these honestly embarrassing levels of knowledge about history and politics. Yeah. And he throws it all out there that like, this is how little I know, but people love him for it. And I just, it makes me lose a lot of respect for people, like when they just, because I don't think he's the worst, but to claim that he's good and that he's intelligent or like a secret genius or something like that, like I find that idea laughable. Just listen to him talk for an hour straight. No pundit analysis. No, just put up a comparison of you and I talking about issues, and then him talking about issues for an hour, and just analyze the differences in articulation and just basic background knowledge of things. And that
humility, like when you don't know something, to not be like, just charge forward anyway.
Yeah.
Like that seems like a poor strategy.
Yeah,
you know?
and it's just and honestly, like it's embarrassing. The thought that people idolize him, or believe that he's intelligent, just like it just makes me question my own sanity at this point. It's like, is it really me that's wrong, or am I just like again, just listening to him speak? It's so difficult as a person of reasonable intelligence to be like, yeah, man, he's telling the truth. Like, I can tell. But in order to educate somebody on why he's lying, you need to give them a 30-year education, on the history of the United States, from the election of Nixon right up until Obama's last day in office.
Yeah.
Because there's so much revisionism that happened in that time, and there's this erasure of any period that came before that, and just this total lack of respect or understanding of how our country got to the point that it was in the 70s with a booming golden age economy, and how we've ended up in 2019 as this just corrupted, limping mess that is, serving a handful of people while people are dying in the streets, literally. And if you told somebody in the golden era, in the golden age economy, in the future, you're going to have more homeless people than you have today, they would have looked at you like you were insane, because they saw how everything was getting better. But somehow we still have a higher homeless rate, like per capita than they did. And we have a lower standard of living. Every generation prior to us has enjoyed a higher standard of living than the previous. And we're going to be one of the first that is going to have a worse standard of living.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because we have vitiated the gold standard, the golden era economy. We took out all of the counterbalancing influences that were keeping that vehicle moving forward in a straight line. And now it's veering off the rails. And
what do you think happened? People got selfish. People thought they could take more from it than they really could. Or
I would say selfishness probably plays into it the most, because the biggest change is the 70s, especially the late 70s and the early 80s, introduced Reaganomics. Because Reagan was VP. No, wait, sorry. So yeah, Reaganomics was essentially this idea that you could tax people at a lower rate, and then that wealth was going to then go up to the top and then trickle down, because they're going to invest, they're going to create jobs, they're going to create opportunity. Yeah. So it's people say trickle down, but it's really Reaganomics, and we've been living that. Ronald Reagan changed the terms of the debate of economic progress moving forward, because we had a very altruistic and borderline socialistic system in place of a social safety net, of making sure that workers are protected, of making sure that corporations weren't just destroying the environment with no consequences. A lot of those apparatuses, while still corrupt in their own time, they were at least created. They weren't sitting around and just waiting for corporations to sprout a conscience, because that's what you hear from a lot of free market capitalists, the really strict free market ones, who believe that there should be no outside influence on the market. The market will correct itself. And I don't buy that. If you want evidence of a totally free market, you should read Upton Sinclair's The Jungle. We read that in high school.
Yep.
And it talks about just what working conditions were like when nobody was there to monitor corporate behavior. And what we've seen from the late 70s to today is a total piece by piece breakdown of that wall that is protecting the consumers and the workers, more importantly, from the profiteers. And again, it's only going to get worse as time goes on. Citizens United was really that was the spring engaging on the trap, was Citizens United, because that's really the point where money became speech. And you could pump millions and millions of dollars into a candidate and essentially just make everybody else irrelevant, because they're everywhere. And the biggest part of a candidacy is exposure and getting people to see your message, to hear your message. Yep. And again, it's another profiteering venture at this point, where you have news media that, you know, sells ad time basically. Mm-hmm. So if you're not a major player in a financial sense already, you're already like, you're out. You know, you're not. Don't even bother. You know, if you can't raise the money to do it. And that's why, you know, it's another thing I like about Bernie's platform is the public funding of elections. Elections shouldn't be something that is, you know, that is controlled by private corporations that are just out to make money. And they aren't there to report on the candidates. They aren't there to give them equal time. They aren't there to actually get into detailed policy discussions. They're there. Yeah, and they all do. You know, Fox News. Ironically enough, Fox News has some of the best debates for Democrats. You know, and on the counterpoint of that, you have CNN, where they were like embarrassingly trying to humanize Ted Cruz, like in their segments. So like it's so interesting to hear people talk about things like the liberal media when it comes to CNN and MSNBC. And this idea that they're this like leftist cabal, because watch the Democratic debates on CNN and just the framing of questions, especially directed at Sanders, to try and like smoke him out as some kind of radical socialist lunatic and like a communist almost. I watched in the 2016 debates where Anderson Cooper had a town hall with him and asked 4 questions in a row about like something, I forget, I think it was like Bernie like repeating something Castro said, or like talking about Castro positively in one instance. And like that to me just really smokes out how the liberal media is a total bullshit philosophy. It doesn't exist. You know, the real liberal media is on YouTube, and you know, it's people just talking basically. Yep. And I would argue that even a lot of conservatives are liberal media on YouTube, because they're not, you know, obviously there's a lot of agenda pushed into it, but the differences between, you know, the small government conservatives and, you know, people like me who are, you know, I would even push myself so far as saying like a democratic socialist, I guess. Mm-hmm. The differences between us are so minute compared to the similarities. You know, there was again something I posted the other day where, you know, we both agree that there's an asshole in the House right now, but we just disagree on who the asshole is, basically. Right. Yes. You know, and I think the trap a lot of conservative people end up falling into is punching down. You know, and it's because of conservative leadership. You know, it's not the fault of the voters. You know, they're just people trying to survive, and I think that was another huge misstep of, you know, the DNC during 2016 was they wrote them off. They're deplorables. They're racist. They're sexist. You know, but the vast majority of Trump supporters, as I've been able to observe and understand, are literally just disgruntled working class people.
That's exactly what they are.
Their you know, feelings on race and their feelings on, you know, feminism, and that does not factor in whatsoever to most of these people. Right. Again, like we talked about how they just wanted to throw a Molotov through the window, and there was Trump, you know, and I think that
in both hands.
Yeah, and people just immediately discounted them, and they lost as a result. You know, they could have won those people over had they just said like, we hear you. You know, this government has not been serving you. You know, if they just made one concession that they're not God's gift to the earth. Right. That it could have been totally different. But no, you had Hillary and her arrogance, you know, and her, you know, the slogan being, I'm with her. Like that's a pretty egotistical slogan.
It's not even
and then counter it with Trump's, which is like, you know, a little hammy and, you know, ironic to me, but make America great again.
Make America great.
Like it's, you know, it's not make Donald Trump the president. It's not make me great. He was playing the populist angle, which works. Every single time that a populist runs against an establishment crony, the populist wins. Every single time. That is like an immutable fact of politics. Yep. Like any time, ever since the foundation of democracy, if you can speak to people and get them on your side, you're going to win over somebody who's just saying like, you know, bullshit platitudes. and who by their actions, by definition, doesn't give a shit about you. And I think, but again, the great trap that people fall into is that they say, well, the Democrats are garbage because they're liars, they're corrupt, so the Republicans, that's what I'm left with. And it's literally out of the frying pan and into the fire at that point. Yeah. They're the same, like we talked about the Patriot Act reauthorization.
Yep.
They both vote for it. When it comes to war and servicing the American military industrial complex, it's so clear that behind closed doors they're on the same page, and that the rest of it is just a smokescreen to basically keep you forcing them into power, because people have bought into the idea that a two-party system, is all that we can have. That there's not.
That's why I'm doing it, because I don't believe it for a second. I think it's structured this way intentionally, and I think we have the ability to restructure it in a better way, and that's why I'm doing this.
Yeah. And like stuff like this is valuable. I don't care how many people listen to it. Like, you just need to get people listening and understanding of the reality of the situation that we're in. Mm-hmm. And because a lot of people are asleep to it, and it's by no fault of their own. They're literally just trying to survive. And I can't fault anybody for that.
Nope.
But that war is happening, whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And again, like, that trap is closing right now, and I that's why I personally would love to see a Bernie presidency, just to see, A, if he's true to his word, and B, if he can convince enough people to, create a massive legislative push, because that's really what Obama didn't do, and I think it was on purpose. Is that for the midterms he said, no, just go to sleep, I got this. Like you were talking about earlier, with the idea of egalitarian versus like almost a Luciferian kind of idea of handling things, where it's like, no, I'm the man. But then, Trump does that also, where he says, I'm the only person who can solve X, Y, and Z. And that's just a media turnoff to me also, where I'm just like, no, you can't. You're just a guy. You don't know everything. I know you like to think that you do, but I'm not buying it. Like, I'm sorry. I'm going to use my brain and my understanding of things to parse through your words and start to see where the gaps in your knowledge are, and they are numerous. For a lot of different issues.
Yep.
And but again,
he fills the gap with protecting his own ego. Yeah. And we all have an ego, and we all protect it in our own ways. But the way that he does it is so like over the top and obvious.
It makes it hard to take him seriously. Yeah. And I think that frustrates a lot of his supporters, but I'm not going to even give him, like, I barely think about Donald Trump unless he says something stupid, because he's just a walking gaffe machine at this point, he just says shit. And I can't have respect for anybody like that, who doesn't have, an idea of what they're talking about, but feels the need to talk about it anyway. Yeah. Like that really bothers me, that assumed expert opinion, where there are, amateurs in high school who have a better level of understanding of history and politics and the mechanics of, a government, how it should work, than a 72-year-old man. And I would argue the same against the Democrats at this point. They don't get it. They're just as much a part of the problem as he is. And it's really interesting being in that position of, like, not really finding either party very tenable right now. Yeah. Because both love to accuse you of being the other at this point.
Yes. Yeah, I feel that way all the time. I often get painted one way or the other depending on who I'm standing next to, And I'm just tired of left and right, and I would much prefer forward together would be a better solution.
It's a complex conflict, and people love to boil it down to left and right, but it is, it's multi-level. There's so many layers. There's the information war, there's the economic war. There's,
we didn't even get into any of that, but I think we'll have to have you back on so we can dive into some of these other subjects, because we're already over time. We're at 2+, and
boy,
this is good though.
Yeah, it really went fast. Damn.
Man, we got into some good stuff here.
Yeah, no, I had a good time.
Much appreciate your time, and look forward to talking to you more, and hopefully people enjoy this and comment on it and share it, and we can keep this all moving forward.
Yep. Thanks, man.
All right, man. Appreciate your time.
Yep.
Take care of yourself.